Scary telling.
I sat across from my therapist, Dr. Michaels, feeling nervous and anxious. I had been seeing him for a few months now, trying to deal with the anxiety and paranoia that had been plaguing me for years. "Doctor," I said, "I think I'm finally making progress. I got rid of all my friends that you said I was imagining. But now the problem is that when I try to explain, the cops say they can't see you." Dr. Michaels looked at me with a concerned expression. "What do you mean, they can't see me?" "I mean that every time I try to explain to someone that you're helping me, they say they can't see you. They act like I'm talking to myself." Dr. Michaels leaned forward in his chair. "And do you believe that I'm real?" I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I was crazy for believing in a therapist that no one else could see. But then I nodded. "Yes, I do. You've been helping me so much, and I couldn't have made it this far without you." Dr. Michaels gave me a small smile. "I'm glad to hear that. But it's important that you understand that I'm not really here. I'm just a projection of your subconscious, a manifestation of your own mind." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean? Are you saying that I'm imagining you too?" Dr. Michaels nodded. "Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. You're projecting me as a way to cope with your anxiety and paranoia. But the important thing is that you continue to work with me to try and overcome your issues." I nodded, feeling more confused than ever. Was I really just imagining him? Was everything I had been experiencing just a figment of my imagination? As I left Dr. Michaels' office and walked out into the bright sunlight, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was like the world around me had shifted, like I was seeing things differently than before. And then, as I walked down the street, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. A figure in a dark coat, standing at the end of the street. It was Dr. Michaels, or at least, it looked like him. I walked towards him, my heart pounding in my chest. "Doctor?" I said, my voice shaking. "Is that really you?" The figure turned towards me, and I saw the familiar smile on his face. "Of course it's me, my dear boy. Who else would it be?" I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Maybe I wasn't crazy after all. Maybe Dr. Michaels was real, and I wasn't just imagining him. But as I walked closer, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The figure in front of me was translucent, like a ghost. And when I tried to touch him, my hand went right through him. I stumbled backwards, feeling dizzy and disoriented. "What's happening?" I said, my voice trembling. "Why can't I touch you?" The figure smiled again, but it was a cold, menacing smile. "Because I'm not really here, my dear boy. I'm just a projection of your own mind. A figment of your imagination." I tried to back away, but it was like I was trapped. The figure moved towards me, and I could feel his icy grip. "And now, my dear boy," he said, his voice filled with malice, "it's time for you to join me in the world of the imagination." I screamed, but no one heard me. It was like I was trapped in my own mind, with no way out. The figure dragged me further and further away from the real world, until everything around me was dark and twisted. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality, like I was being consumed by my own imagination. And then, just when I thought all was lost, I saw a glimmer of light in the distance. I stumbled towards it, feeling like I was about to fall into an abyss. But as I got closer, I saw that it was a door. A door that led back to the real world. With all my strength, I pushed the door open and stumbled out into the bright sunlight. I was back in the real world, safe from the clutches of my own mind. I looked around, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Was it all just a dream? A hallucination? Or was it something more sinister? As I walked down the street, I realized that I would never know for sure. But one thing was certain, I would never be able to trust my own mind again. From that day forward, I kept a close eye on my thoughts and emotions, always wary of what might be lurking in the shadows of my own mind. And as I looked back on that day, I knew one thing for certain: the imaginary doctor had taught me a terrifying lesson about the power of the human mind. To the man that is everything, please return the rest of my daughter. Those were the words written on the note I found on my doorstep, along with a small, intricately wrapped package. I had no idea what it meant, but I knew it couldn't be good. I opened the package with trembling hands, and what I found inside made my blood run cold. It was a lock of hair, unmistakably belonging to my daughter. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of what was happening. Had she been kidnapped? Was this some sick joke? I tried calling her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Panic set in, and I grabbed my coat, running out the door to search for her. It was dark and quiet outside, and the streets were empty. As I walked, I felt a sense of unease creeping over me. Something wasn't right. Suddenly, I heard a sound behind me, like footsteps. I turned around, but there was no one there. I started walking again, but the footsteps followed me. I quickened my pace, and so did the footsteps. My heart racing, I broke into a run. I didn't stop until I reached the police station, where I told them everything. They took the note and the lock of hair as evidence and promised to do everything in their power to find my daughter. Days turned into weeks, and there was still no sign of her. The police were doing everything they could, but it seemed like she had vanished into thin air. I was consumed by grief and guilt. How could I have let this happen? I was supposed to protect her, and now she was gone, possibly forever. But then, one day, I received another note. It was the same handwriting as the first, but this time it was shorter. Meet me at the old abandoned church on the edge of town. Come alone. I knew it was a trap, but I didn't care. I had to do whatever it took to find my daughter. I arrived at the church, and the door was open. I stepped inside, and the door slammed shut behind me. I was trapped. In the center of the room was a small table, and sitting at the table was a man. He was wearing a mask, and I couldn't see his face. But I could tell he was dangerous. He spoke in a low, menacing voice. I have your daughter, and I want something in return. What do you want? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I want your soul, he said. In exchange for your daughter's life, you must give me your soul. It's the only way. I was horrified. How could I make a deal like that? But I knew I had no other choice. I would do anything to save my daughter. I agreed to the man's terms, and he handed me a small vial of liquid. Drink this, he said. It will seal the deal. I hesitated for a moment, but then I swallowed the liquid. It tasted bitter, like death. The man smiled and handed me another note. Your daughter is waiting for you at the old factory on the outskirts of town. Hurry, before it's too late. I rushed to the factory, my heart pounding in my chest. When I arrived, I found my daughter, bound and gagged, but alive. I untied her, and we hugged each other tightly, both of us crying tears of relief. But as we walked back to the car, I felt a strange sensation spreading throughout my body. It was like a coldness, creeping up from my toes to my head. And then, suddenly, everything went black. When I woke up, I was no longer myself. I was possessed by something evil, something that had taken over my body and soul. It was the ultimate price I had paid for my daughter's life. I could feel the darkness consuming me, making me do things I never would have done before. I was a monster, a puppet controlled by a force beyond my understanding. My daughter was safe, but at what cost? Was it worth selling my soul to the devil himself? I still received notes from the man, tempting me with promises of power and wealth. But I know better now. I know that nothing in this world is worth losing your humanity for. So to the man that has everything, I have a message for you. Keep your promises, and don't cross paths with a desperate father. Because when pushed to the brink, we may just be willing to pay the ultimate price. I don't mind that my housemate brings guys home. But just once, I'd like to see one of them leave. I had been living with my housemate, Sarah, for a few months now. She was a friendly girl and always seemed to have a new guy in tow. At first, I didn't think much of it. After all, it was her life, and she could do what she wanted. But then, I started to notice something strange. None of the guys she brought home ever left. They would come over and disappear, leaving in the middle of the night while I slept. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence. But as time went on, it started to bother me more and more. Where were these guys going? And why weren't they coming back? I tried talking to Sarah about it, but she brushed it off, saying that they were just one-night stands and that I shouldn't worry about it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. One night, I decided to stay up and see if I could catch a glimpse of one of Sarah's guests leaving. I sat in my room, watching the clock tick by, waiting for someone to leave. But no one did. I was just about to give up when I heard a noise coming from Sarah's room. It was a muffled sound, like someone struggling. I hesitated for a moment, but then I got up and went to investigate. As I got closer to her room, the sound grew louder. It was definitely someone struggling, and it sounded like they were in pain. My heart racing, I pushed open the door. What I saw in that room will haunt me for the rest of my life. Sarah was standing over a man, her hands covered in blood. He was lying on the ground, writhing in agony, and there was a knife sticking out of his chest. Sarah looked up at me, her eyes wide with shock. "It's not what it looks like," she said, her voice shaking. But it was exactly what it looked like. Sarah was a murderer, and I had been living with her for months without even realizing it. I ran out of the house, barely stopping to grab my phone and call the police. When they arrived, they found Sarah sitting calmly in her room, covered in blood. She didn't even try to deny what she had done. As it turned out, Sarah had been luring men back to her house for months, seducing them and then killing them. She had a twisted obsession with death, and she enjoyed watching her victims suffer. I was lucky to have escaped with my life, but I was haunted by the memory of those poor men trapped in Sarah's grasp. I never would have guessed that my friendly, outgoing housemate was capable of such evil. From that day on, I vowed to never let my guard down again. I realized that you never truly know someone, and that the people closest to you can often be the most dangerous. And as for Sarah's guests, I still wonder what happened to them. I can only hope that they found a way to escape her deadly grasp before it was too late to us. Growing up, I always knew my dad was a bit strange. He spent most of his time locked away in the basement, conducting his experiments. But as a child, I never questioned it. It wasn't until I got older that I began to realize just how twisted his work really was. My dad was a mad scientist, obsessed with finding the secrets of the universe. He spent hours tinkering with his equipment, mixing chemicals, and conducting bizarre experiments. But what terrified me the most was that he refused to let me leave the basement. He said it was for my own safety, that the outside world wasn't ready for what he was creating. As I grew older, my curiosity got the best of me. I began to sneak out of the basement when my dad wasn't looking, trying to catch a glimpse of the world outside. But every time I did, he caught me and dragged me back down to his laboratory. One day, when my dad was busy mixing chemicals, I snuck out again. This time, I made it all the way to the top of the stairs before he caught me. He was furious, and I could see the anger in his eyes as he dragged me back down to the basement. That's when he showed me what he had been working on all these years. A giant, grotesque creature with tentacles for arms and a single, glowing eye in the center of its head. It was the stuff of nightmares, and I could feel my stomach churning as I looked at it. My dad told me that he had created the creature using my DNA. That's why he never let me leave the basement. He didn't want my mother to see what he had done to her child. I was horrified. How could he do something like this? I begged him to let me go, to destroy the creature and forget everything he had ever done. But he refused. Days turned into weeks, and my dad became more and more obsessed with his creation. He spent all his time in the basement, tending to the creature and experimenting with new ways to make it stronger. And then, one day, the creature escaped. I don't know how it happened, but I remember hearing screams coming from the street outside. My dad rushed upstairs to investigate, leaving me alone in the basement with the creature. I was terrified. I could hear the creature's heavy breathing and the sound of its tentacles dragging across the floor. I tried to hide, but there was nowhere to go. And then, suddenly, the door to the basement burst open. It was my mom, and she was horrified at what she saw. The creature was standing over me, ready to strike. But my mom didn't hesitate. She grabbed a nearby wrench and swung it at the creature's head, knocking it to the ground. And then she turned to my dad. "What have you done?" she screamed. "What kind of monster have you created?" My dad didn't say a word. He just stood there, staring at the ground, as the police arrived to take him away. In the aftermath of that night, my life changed forever. My dad was sentenced to life in prison for his crimes, and I was sent to live with my aunt and uncle in another state. But the memory of that night still haunts me. The memory of my dad's twisted experiments and the creature he created from my DNA. And sometimes, while I'm alone in the dark, I swear I can still hear the sound of its breathing and the dragging of its tentacles coming up from the basement below. I always knew I was different from other people. I had a dark fascination with watching others, especially those I cared about. And so, I found myself standing outside my girlfriend's window, watching her as she went about her evening routine. She was so beautiful, so perfect. And yet, she didn't understand me. She didn't appreciate my love for her, my need to be near her, to watch her every move. As I watched her, I wondered how much longer I needed to keep the oven on. I had been preparing something special for her, something that would show her just how much I cared. I had been planning this for weeks, carefully selecting the ingredients, preparing the recipe just right. But as I watched her through the window, I knew that I couldn't wait any longer. I needed to show her my love, to share this special recipe with her. I slipped into her house, quietly making my way to the kitchen. I could feel the adrenaline pumping through my veins, my heart racing with excitement and fear. And then I saw her, standing in front of the oven, her back turned towards me. She was wearing a beautiful white dress, her long blonde hair falling in soft curls around her face. I couldn't help myself. I walked up behind her, wrapping my arms around her waist, feeling her warmth and softness against me. She struggled at first, trying to push me away, but I held her tight, whispering in her ear, "SHH, it's okay. I just want to show you something." I could feel her relax, her breathing slowing down as I reached for the oven. I carefully pulled out the tray, revealing my masterpiece. It was a pie, filled with all of my favorite ingredients. But there was something different about this pie, something special. I had added a secret ingredient, something that would make her love me forever. I took a knife and cut a slice, carefully placing it on a plate. I handed it to her, watching as she took a bite. At first, she smiled, savoring the flavors. But then, her face twisted into a look of horror. "What did you do?" she gasped. I smiled, feeling a sense of satisfaction wash over me. "I added a special ingredient, just for you," I said, as I watched her fall to the ground, her body convulsing. I had drugged her, using a special concoction that I had developed myself. It was a recipe that would ensure that she would love me forever, that she would never leave me. And as I watched her writhe in pain, I knew that my plan had worked. She would be mine forever, trapped in this eternal love. But then something strange happened. I started to feel sick, my head spinning. I looked down at the pie, realizing that I had accidentally added too much of the drug to the mixture. I stumbled backwards, feeling my body collapse as the world went dark. And then, I woke up in a strange room. I was lying on a bed, my body weak and sore. I looked around, realizing that I was in a hospital. The police had found me, unconscious in my girlfriend's kitchen. They had traced my movements, found evidence of my stalking and obsession. And now, I was facing a long prison sentence. As I lay there, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. My obsession had finally been exposed, and I could finally start to heal, to become a better person. But then, I saw her. My girlfriend was standing at the end of my bed, her eyes filled with anger and fear. "You'll never have me," she whispered, as she walked out of the room. I knew then that my obsession had truly destroyed everything that mattered to me, that it had driven me to do terrible things. And I knew that I could never go back to that dark place again. As I sat alone in my prison cell, I thought about the recipe, the one that had almost destroyed my life. And I realized that there was no special ingredient that could make someone love you forever, that true love couldn't be forced or manufactured. And so, I vowed to never let my obsession consume me again, to never again try to force love where it didn't exist. It was a hard lesson to learn, but one that I knew I had to take to heart if I ever wanted to be truly free.